Probably. The stories that happened in the villages already seem banal and written in a pattern, but nevertheless, I want to tell mine. I was only 12 years old at the time, a child's unstable psyche. Everything could be imagined. I understand it well now, but at that moment I felt great, and despite the late hour, I did not want to sleep. It happened in Vasknar. My mother and my aunt and I went to visit our friends. I met some nice girls there. We made friends. We went for nights and days to swim, and one such night we went to a disco. I do not remember exactly what time the car came to pick us up, but I remember that it took us 40 minutes. It was about 11 p.m. You know, if you go back on foot, it will take at least 2 hours. At the disco, I quarreled with everyone and decided that I would not wait for the car and go home by myself. It was about 2 a.m. The car was supposed to come only at 4 a.m. As you might have guessed, the road is surrounded on both sides by dense forest. But at that moment I knew no fear. I just wanted to get home. I was offended at my friends. I walked for a long time, about an hour exactly. I figured I was halfway there, and there was still half to go. I continued on my way, and walked longer and longer, with no village in sight. I realized I was lost. But how? I had been walking in a straight line the whole time. It was just impossible. To be honest, at that moment I regretted having left the disco. Fear took hold of me for good and I was in tears. I ran and ran as fast as I could and finally arrived. But not to the village. The road was divided into 2 parts. I remembered it when we drove in the car to the disco, but from where we left, I forgot. Now I had to make a choice which road to take. But suddenly a young man came up behind me. My fear let go and I calmed down. He did not seem dangerous to me. On the contrary, he was a kind of salvation for me. The young man asked me what I was doing so late alone on an empty road. I replied that I was lost and could not remember the way to the village. The young man nodded in the direction of one of the roads and said he would take me. We walked for about 30 minutes, and I kept telling him things like how I had quarreled with my friends and other nonsense. I thought he was just listening, not answering anything. But when I asked him the specific question, "What are you doing out so late?" and looked in the direction of my companion, no one was there. I was afraid again. I was sure there was a young man walking beside me, but the whole time we were walking I had no need to look at him. I ran again and left the brick thoroughfare behind me. I did not run for long, and when I came home I saw that everyone was home and no one was still asleep. How is that possible? It took me no more than 3 hours to get home. I left the disco at 2 in the morning and came home at 7 in the morning. My mother was sitting in the kitchen and was worried. With the others they decided to go and look for me, but I came and told them what had happened to me. Anya, that was the name of the lady of the house, and my mother's friend told me this story. 3 years ago, a car picked up the guys and took them to a disco, but the driver lost control and crashed into another oncoming car, killing 5 people, 3 boys and 2 girls. The rest survived. The accident happened right where the road divides into 2 parts. Who was it? Did a ghost help me? The ghost of one of the dead guys. Whoever it was, I'm very grateful to him. He showed me the way home. By the way, Christina, Anya's daughter, got it in the neck that morning. I was even glad, because I had a fight with her, and she got it because she was supposed to watch me that night and not let me go anywhere alone in any way. Employees of one of the cab services once gathered at an old diner. They were sitting in their group, all frowning. I decided to come up and ask what was going on. Because I am a new employee in this service, then I do not know anyone well. At the same time, and get acquainted with colleagues, I decided. What happened? The men all sighed heavily. The fact is that one of our workers, a good friend of mine, was killed in an accident. He drove into the path of another car and collided with it. And before that, the deceased had just received a late order, and after fulfilling it crashed on the highway, said the old man, a cab driver. So, as if we don't get orders at night. The mysterious thing, said the second cabbie, is that cars always crash on that track. It's all 1-to-1. He couldn't cope with the steering and drove into the oncoming traffic. and all the injured drivers were alone in the car, all cab drivers. It was as if death itself was sending you an order for your own death. After these words, the men looked at each other and said that if the order was related to that old highway, then no one would do it for anything else. Soon I got a message on my phone about a new order. These horror stories about mystical orders, the old highway, and death had completely thrown me off balance, but I had to work. I sat in my old Audi 100 and waited for the client. He was obviously running late, so I got a little bored and was just about to go on the internet to look for instructions on troubleshooting the exhaust system, which I should have done a long time ago, when the door was opened by a white-haired girl in a blue dress. One look at her and everything in me cringed. She was beautiful, but there was something about her that frightened me. She apologized for a long time, tried to explain something, but I did not quarrel with her. "Shall I buckle up?" the customer asked. I didn't mind. It started raining, and it got noticeably colder, in spite of the fact that it was the height of summer outside. It was night and I was driving. I felt sleepy and my nose was nodding off. A girl so confidently and defiantly declares to me, "Don't sleep." I woke up. We had just turned onto the ill-fated old road. And then the strangest thing began. It became cold in the car. The temperature inside the cabin dropped to such an extent that the glass began to get covered in frost. The girl in the next seat did not make a sound, as if only I thought it was strange. I looked at her, and my body went numb. She was sitting like she was undead, pale and translucent. The only question running through my mind was, what track is this? What track is this? She slowly turned her head and said, barely audible, "Look at the road, or else," and disappeared into thin air. I turned my head sharply. A laden lorry was rushing into my windshield. A moment of weakness in my hands, but my reaction and driving experience did not fail me, and I turned the steering wheel to the right in time. The road was slippery, and my Audi literally rolled away from under the wheels of the damn truck. I only had time to hear the sound of brakes and a bang. Before I finally lost consciousness, I heard a woman's voice in my head. "Shit, it didn't work. You're lucky." When I opened my eyes, my work colleagues were standing over me, talking loudly. Almost immediately, the doctor came in and said that I had only bruises and abrasions, and that my car had not suffered much damage either. I would have to make minor repairs. The doctor patted me on the shoulder and said that I was lucky. And after he said that, I immediately remembered that girl from my last trip. I never worked as a cab driver again, which I don't regret at all. I want to tell you about an episode from our road trip this summer. Our trip was long, more than 6 kilometers one way. We drove with a group of 2 cars, all the way from home to the end point of the route. We drove on the tablet. Basically, in the city, tried not to go in order to save time. Almost all cities have bypass roads, but there are exceptions, such as the hero city of Volgograd. So, we decided to stay there, to walk in historic places, to have a rest, to sleep in a rented apartment, and to move forward at night. All according to plan. Rested, hoping for a more or less empty route, with the intention to go all night and longer. We left the city at 20. At this time of day it was already dark in Volgograd. The traffic on the way out of town was heavy, and in order to save the battery of the tablet, we decided to drive in the main mass of motorists, without navigation. When we realized that the city had long been left behind, we decided to turn on Google Maps and check the planned route. So I realized that we had turned off at the exit of the city much earlier than the great Google Map. It was decided, having made a little loop, to take a little bit to the right. Before, it was planned to go through Akse, and we had to go through Lyapishev. At first, everything was usual. It was dark, the road not so good. But then something began to depress. The road began to change from paved to dusty and gravel. No cars, except for our 2. Okay, let's move on. We decided to speed up. We felt a little uncomfortable. A gas station appeared on our left, but it was also deserted. No settlements, no cars. I'm looking at the map in Google and seeing the topography. On the left, bushes and fields or open woods behind them. On the right, bushes in either a small river or a swamp. And so, swerving along this deserted road, we began to run into high white crosses glowing from the headlights, one by one. And then on the horizon there are two lights of oncoming headlights, but we were not happy about it, because for some reason, both my husband and I immediately remembered the inscription on the exit from Volgograd. Driver, be vigilant. There are robberies on the roads, and we had 2 men for 2 cars, the rest were girls and children. A Jiguli flew by. My heart was pounding. We were flying at 150 exactly. Somehow no one cared about the suffering of the car's suspension. And then both my husband and I almost simultaneously noticed some sort of glow that flashed across the road. I looked up to the road a fraction of a second later than it noticed the husband. So I saw only a glow that flashed. But my husband said he thought that the road crossed the cyclist in reflective clothing. There were a couple of bloody chanterelles on the road that were knocked over. My heart raced. Fever hit my ears and cheeks. To be completely happy, I noticed that the internet was gone. No phone service either. We came to a fork in the road. No internet. The navigator said that we were in the middle of a field. We continue at random. I started to pray, thinking over all the prayers that I knew, calling to all the forces, looking at the icons glued to the panel in the car. A dead end. We turn off into the fields. And oh, miracle. Some buildings, an abandoned building, apparently a run-down business, and near it the late-night youth drinking beer. Our joy had no limits. My husband with the driver of our second car went to them, asked for directions. They showed us how to get to Oktyabrsky, and from there, they said, to Koltnikovo by highway, no place to stray. Then we drove on in silence and very fast, with prayers and thoughts of a normal road, of people. So, we saw the sign to Oktyabrsky. We exhaled. We reached Koltnikovo and stayed for the night in the first motel. By distance, as I then looked, we drove about 200 kilometers, but as if in the same breath. No more desire to drive at night on the unplanned road on the way did not arise. And from the memory of that road is still a chill on the skin.